Welcome back. Policy Christian is a channel devoted to using Christian principles as the basis for rebuilding both the Western Church and the Western civilization it nurtured from the attacks of what I like to call the two giants. Hello, I'm Michael Saxon, the Policy Christian. In my last video, I provided a snapshot of all the harm being wrought on the West by the two giants, liberal fascism and feudal corporatism. In these early videos, we're exploring the policy model I am using until we reach the point, after the next couple of videos I hope, where we can look at how resurrecting Christian principles through socio-economic policy can resuscitate Western civilization while rebuilding the church through confronting the two giants. And we do that through policy, public policy. Now, this isn't a tilt at triumphalism, the false and unbiblical belief that Christians will triumph before Jesus returns. It's about doing the right things in our times, occupying until he comes, as the parable says, by being obedient no matter what to the mission he entrusted to his people. Now, this is my fourth video, and we're going to look at the two mechanisms that will cut down the two giants. As I've explained earlier, the West faces the problem. You can see my earlier video for that. And dealing with that problem requires using two tools, if you like, the 5 core Christian worldview principles, or just the 5 principles, or five core principles, and what I call the 12 reforms. Now, this is going to be difficult to get your head around at the moment, but hang in there and you'll end up with a quite unique understanding and perspectives, picture if you like, well ahead of where most people are at the moment. And remember, if you watch my first video, and if you haven't, go back and do so, most people are in Plato's cave, and if you're there, you're going to struggle to get out. And in my 5th vlog, the next one, I will explain how the principles and the 12 reforms can be used to advance the cause of Christ while concurrently providing a policy foundation for the Western world generally. Now, when I was writing Issachar's Call, which was my first book, I identified about 20 elements within the Christian worldview, then reduced them down to the 5 metacritical, if you like, or meta-criteria or principles into which all the others fold. That's the 5 core principles. If you know your Bible and think about it, it soon becomes obvious that the 5 core principles actually stream right through Scripture and form the foundation upon which Western civilization was built. At least they did until about 50 years ago. So in the next overlay, I'm going to list the famous 5, the 5 principles. I'll just unpack them a little at this stage, take them into the policy world, since that's where this channel is going. Christians have become so over-pietized, the faith has been turned into an effete irrelevance as far as the civilization it brought into existence is concerned. The core 5 principles concentrate the mind of the Christian on those essential elements to both building the Christian faith via evangelism and reviving a fast-fading Western civilization. Now, here's the 5 principles. The first, and arguably, almost certainly the most important, is that we're all made in the image of God. Now, that simply means, if you translate it from Christianese into secularese, it simply means that every individual is unique with their own skills and abilities and interests, and the structures or institutions of society should be so organized that they can maximize each individual's opportunities to achieve their full potential. The second is free will. The third is individual responsibility. And the second and third principles are intertwined. They're like a reinforcing loop. And that becomes obvious as you delve into applying principle to social problems and keep these 2 principles in mind. The fourth is love your neighbor. And that doesn't mean your next door neighbor. That means having empathy for and a concern for your society as a whole, as well as your neighbor. And the 5th is to love God, is to obey his commands. Now, translated again into the secular, it simply means, in general terms, that we should have a concern for the system of justice, for just laws, and for a system in which everyone is equal and to which the law is equally applied. Now, when we come to look at public policy issues, we will discover these principles do not exist in isolation. They fold into each other, often creating a powerful benchmarking tool against which to judge the value of anything done in the interests of society and civilization. Their application will also tend to radiate out across society, like the ripples created when you drop a stone in a pond. If you look at this next overlay, you'll see that I've positioned here the 5 core principles, and then I've drawn out, you'll see these little R's everywhere. They're to indicate reinforcing loops, and they're like these ripples I'm talking about in the pond. If we were to go into this particular overlay closely, they would generate lots of other overlays, lots of other line diagrams like this, because as these principles radiate out into the way they're applied in society, they have profound effects everywhere. And that's something that we'll come to as we go on into the policy area. Anything we do to bring down fascist liberalism and feudal corporatism, because they laid the foundation of Western culture. As I said a moment ago, the 12 reforms exist to take those 5 principles and bring them into a policy framework that creates the conditions where the stones are dropping into the ponds and the policy effects are rippling out everywhere through society. Now let's go to the 12 reforms next, and they'll appear on the next overlay. As I've said in an earlier video, the first 8 of the 12 would bring down liberal fascism. That's the left, the wokest, progressive, political, academic, media, liberals, etc. And the last 4 would cripple feudal corporatism, which I'm talking about here are the big corporate moguls, the big corporate institutions, including banking, who have rigged the system to scoop up all the wealth and power for themselves, creating unprecedented and totally unjustifiable, monstrous wealth inequality. And the corporatists are now intent on protecting all of their ill-gotten gains by forcing us all back into some form of new serfdom from where we'll never be able to challenge their privilege, power, control and wealth again. So, just quickly, I will go through these 12 reforms. In a later video, I will talk more about correlations between the reforms and the 5 core principles, because they all fold into each other in a rich mix, before explaining how they create the basis for detailed and transformational policy on a scale that will restore the West, making it stronger than it ever was before. So here we go. Here there are 12 reforms. The first up is to introduce direct democracy. Now, I would argue if you can't get this reform brought into the political process, you may as well forget about the others, because it's very unlikely that our current political class, being socially closely associated with the 2 giants, will ever do anything else. So direct democracy is the Swiss system of binding citizens initiated referenda, or BCIR. The next, number 2, is representative reform. It's designed to supplement or support the first reform by ending the undemocratic practices of the party political system. The third is to maximize an individual's opportunities. And remembering what I said before, that's about being made in the image of God and making sure that all the institutions in society are designed to maximize every individual's opportunities to achieve their full potential. The number 4 is to end income tax and in fact to transform the way taxation is done and the way governments acquire the income they need to function. The next, number 5, is to reduce the size of government. I would argue it should go back to roughly where it was at the beginning of last century, which is roughly 10% of GDP, somewhere between 10 and 20%, nowhere near the 40, 50+% it is in a lot of Western countries now. Number 6 was to empower local communities. All local districts, regions, counties whichever way you want to look at it. In other words, to ensure that these areas are more autonomous and that a lot of wealth isn't going out of them through corporations to far-flung parts of the banking world, etc. Number 7 is cultural preservation, including, of course, the big topic at the moment, which is the integration of immigrant cultures into Western society, plus a range of other things. The number 8, and we're getting into the last 4, or rather, we're getting almost to the last 4. The number 8 is advancing justice, which is a complete reformation in the way justice is done, both in terms of criminal justice, in terms of constitutional justice, civil justice, and that is a whole subject in itself. And now we get into the last 4. Interest-free credit, in other words, all loans or credit given to individuals or business startups should be done without the need for interest, which is the albatross that hangs around most people's necks for the rest of their lives. It's totally unjustified and unnecessary, except for those who want to make vast wealth at the expense of the rest of us. Number 10, end growth wealth inequality. I argue that we need to introduce a wealth cap and expropriate the wealth of people who have, and I'm only talking about people here, not institutions, the vast wealth of people who simply cannot possibly need it. I'm still advocating the fact that that people need to become wealthy. Otherwise, you're going to trample on innovation and entrepreneurship and the motivations or incentives to engage in business and science and all the things that advance a society. We don't want to get in the way of that. Number 11 is to introduce workplace democracy, which I call the Semco model for managing businesses of 100 or more, which would vastly improve the means by which owners and entrepreneurs manage their businesses, and also make going to work and working as an employee so much more interesting and rewarding for individuals. And finally, number 12, re-establish true capitalism by ending the whole neoliberal corporatist globalist model that has so enriched the few at the expense of the rest of us. So there you go. That's it for now. In my next vlog, number 5, we'll outline how the 5 principles in the 12 reforms play their part in rebuilding the church. We've been focusing more on how these principles and reforms can impact on civilization, but we've also got to look at the church, because if you go back to my earlier videos, well, remember we're talking about doing 2 things here: revitalizing both civilization and the church. And we rebuild the church using the 4 steps of what I call the next generation church evangelism strategy, and we'll come into that in the next video. So please remember now to look for that next video, click on all the usual buttons, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.